And water is the reason it's such a good solvent is it is very hungry to get all that stuff back. So it's great when you're using it to get rid of stuff in instruments, but it will also attack your pipes and take the metals and other constituents out of that. So if you have older pipes, it certainly can begin to become a problem because it will begin to break down the pipes and dissolve them and bring all that stuff into your apartment.
What if one conversation could save a life? What if one new process or new product could save a patient from surgical harm? Broadcasting from a hospital basement near you, you're listening to the Beyond Clean Canada podcast, the voice of medical device reprocessing from C to C to C. Each week, we spotlight the people, processes, and products from around the country and the world that are disrupting our profession and helping you fight dirty. Every instrument, every time. Join us as we have the kinds of conversations that matter and give our industry the kind of voice that it deserves. And now, it's time to go True North strong and beyond clean.
Welcome back, all you Canadian clean freaks, to Season 2 of Beyond Clean. We have a very special guest today, Jeffrey Paquet. He's going to talk about all the importance of water quality. So buckle up.
From the studios of Healthcare HQ, you're listening to Beyond Clean Canada, the voice of sterile processing from C to C to C.
Welcome back, all you Canadian clean freaks, to episode 2 of Canada's Beyond Clean. We have a very expert guest today with water quality, Jeffrey Paquet. Did I pronounce that right, Paquet?
Yeah, it's French-Canadian. So.
Oh, there we go.
Yeah.
Before we get into our questions, Jeffrey, do you want to tell the Canadian audience just a little bit about yourself in case they haven't been able to tune into any of Hank's expert water quality series?
Sure. So my name is Jeffrey Paquet. I'm the CEO of VERDA Water Quality Systems as well as MMIC. We have been working in healthcare since the mid-90s, first in supplying mobile operating rooms, then mobile sterile processing departments, and in the process of supporting people through innovations and supplying them with water, we developed an expertise in water. And so I work with Beyond Clean to help people navigate the issues surrounding water.
Beautiful. And then, Jeffrey, just before we jump into our questions about water quality, can you explain a little to our audience the term gap analysis?
Sure. So my background actually is engineering and manufacturing, and there are various tools you can use when you need to move the dial on your excellence. The gap analysis process is simply a way of baselining where you are and then where you need to be, and then actually mapping a way of getting there. So, if I want to improve my water quality, I first have to know where I am, and then I look at the standard as to where I need to be, and in the middle is the gap, and then there needs to be a plan to get there. And it may be that you're going to take several steps to get there, but it's a way of defining where you need to go.
Jeff, water quality is vital in our industry, as we are all aware, so much so that in America, there was a new AMI standard created directly dealing with the issue. I think it's ST 108. How is the new standard being received, and what challenges or issues does this pose with being compliant?
Back in August of 2023, AMI released a new standard. It's actually ANSI AMI standard and governed by ISO. So technically it is a standard that is approved by the international body of standards, ISO. It doesn't mean it applies to everybody. And in the United States, it is not a regulatory standard. However, there are some regulatory bodies that govern healthcare in the United States that says you have to manage water in your SPD or in your hospital in general to best practices. And this is a clear way which best practices has been defined. In terms of its uptake, right after it was released, there had been some time elapsed before we really began to see hospitals digest the standard and begin to start to move to trying to get into compliance. So there are plenty of hospitals that haven't really addressed it yet, and there are some hospitals now that are really beginning to look to move towards being compliant with the standard.
Yeah, well, it's such a step in the right direction. We know it's, like we say, it's so vital, so important to everything that we do when we reprocess our medical devices.
Now, are you familiar a lot with our standards, the CSA standards?
I am not familiar with the standards in Canada at all.
And, Stace, every once in a while, from time to time, we will reach out to our Beyond Clean brothers and sisters in the U.S., and this is one of those times, Jeff. And, as Stacey mentioned it earlier, the Water Quality Expert Series that you're doing with Hank Balch, just what a deep dive, man. I've listened to 4 or 5 episodes so far, and, I look forward to the rest. And I just read your bio, too, man. Like, I think you got the coolest bio, ever for Beyond Clean Canada podcast guest, right? I think, NASA, you work with NASA on the space shuttle. You work with Boeing on the 777 airplane. You work with Dodge on the Viper. I mean, we're honored to have you.
How I ended up here, who knows?
And we are honored to have you as a guest.
Yeah, I was thinking, how did you go from that to here?
Well, interestingly, it really had to do with, so I had this whole career in aerospace and design. I was in engineering design for a long time in transportation. I sort of made my way here because I was born in Vermont. As I said at the beginning, both sides of my family were all from Quebec at one point, only about 40 miles from the border with Quebec. I wanted to come back here, so I had to sort of reinvent my career, and I got into the auto industry because of that, and then eventually made my way more into the business world. A lot of small businesses in Vermont, a lot of small manufacturing companies. So I eventually made my way to Mobile Medical as its CEO through that process, and then developed a knowledge of water through our work with SPD departments all over the states.
Wow.
That's amazing.
Well, we are fortunate to have you as a guest.
We need people like you. Yeah.
Yes, and
well, thank you.
To have you as a member of our
I'm just south of you.
You are. I don't think you're too far from myself. I'm in Ontario, so you're Vermont, correct?
Yes. Yeah, we are. I'm like 2 hours and 15-minute drive to Montreal, so that's right.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so I'm over on the other side a little bit, but yeah.
Yeah. East West. Nice. So, Jeff, how does the water quality impact sterilization efficiency and patient safety?
So really the whole reason we are concerned with water quality is to prevent hospital-acquired infections, and specifically surgical site infections, which is where the vector for the SPD to introduce pathogens and risk to patient care. I'm not sure how it works in Canada, but I know in the United States, hospitals are monitored both by the federal insurance program that we have, Medicare, Medicaid, as well as private insurance, and their reimbursement for procedures are affected by their rates of hospital-acquired infections, and also they don't get reimbursed for hospital-acquired infections. So there's some financial incentive, certainly, for hospitals to do a good job at avoiding that. So all of what we do in sterile processing is to prepare instruments so they can be safely used in patients. And water is both one of our key defenses against contamination, but it's also one of the most significant vectors for contamination. So it's a double-edged sword.
And Jeff, that leads into our next question here. There are 4 categories of water: potable, utility, critical, and steam. Can you explain the difference between these 4 different types of water and how they each hold a different level of responsibility and purity in a sterile processing environment, medical device reprocessing environment?
Right. So in the standard, the first category of water that's recognized in the standard is utility water. And utility water People might refer to it as potable water, which is water that's safe to drink. In the States, we have certain standards. I'm sure in Canada, you have certain standards about what's safe to drink. It may meet the standards of ST108 for utility water, and utility water is the water that, we use at the sink for soaking instruments and in washer disinfectors or the ultrasonics for cleaning instruments. We don't use it for final rinse, but we do use it for probably the majority of the water that's consumed in the department is utility water. So I know in the United States, there are many areas of the country where the potable water, the drinking water, does meet standards for utility water. But there are also large areas of the United States where it does not meet utility water requirements. And utility water requirements are established based on the ideas of patient safety, but also equipment functionality and the capability of your chemicals to work that you're using in the process where you're using that type of water. When we move up the chain of purity, we now have what's called critical water. Critical water, often people call it their RO or their DI water. And this is water where a lot of the natural constituents that come along with water, potable water or utility water, are removed so that you are able to maximize the solvent capabilities of water. Water is our most used solvent, right? That's what we use it for, to dissolve things. And water that is more pure will more aggressively dissolve things. So the more pure the water, the more it is effective at getting rid of everything we don't want. Another aspect of its purity is to remove things that maybe don't affect how it works as a solvent, but also to remove things that might attack our equipment or attack the instruments themselves and affect the process. And then finally, steam. And when we talk about steam and Amy, we're actually talking about measuring steam condensate. Steam condensate is basically steam that's been used in the process, has condensed, and then will drip out of the sterilizer in a port, and then we can actually measure it. But it's almost a direct indicator of what the quality of your steam is by collecting this water. And steam condensate is basically much like critical water. When you produce steam, you leave a lot of stuff behind, and the steam condensate is held to basically this very similar or same standards as critical water. You want your steam to be very pure. It's the last thing to touch your instruments before they go to the OR. So you have to have a very clean media to be successful and not leave anything behind.
So the blackness that is often left inside of a sterilizer, like if you were to wipe down your sterilizer and you notice on your rag there's blackness, is that because the steam quality is not up to par and should be more pure? Is that what's being left behind?
It can be an indicator that your steam quality needs work. Even steam that meets the requirements may over time discolor your sterilizers, and you have to routinely clean them. However, if your sterilizers need to be cleaned quarterly or every month because they're becoming discolored, that's probably a good indication that your steam quality is not good. It may have metals in it or other constituents that you don't want there in the process.
How would a facility go about fixing that issue?
So, the first thing to do is get an understanding of what the issue is. Is it metals? Is it, are we having problems with something earlier in the process where we're leaving chemicals still on the instruments, or something is going wrong in the process there? But once you've identified it's in the steam, you really need to look at how the steam is produced. A lot of hospitals are still using house steam, which, if properly cleaned up before it gets to the sterilizer, it can be used effectively, but in many cases it can't. And what affects that is the type of piping that's delivering the steam. It picks up stuff in the piping as it moves to the sterilizers, how far the steam is away from the plant, and is it cooling, is it condensing, is it wet steam, and then how well the boiler plant is maintained or the boiler is maintained. All these can be factors. And then then just the water that's coming from the source, whether it's the municipal water or whatever, can be a problem right from the get-go. And no matter what you do with those boilers, you won't be able to correct the problem that way by simply trying to make some adjustments there.
In-house adjustments. So we're probably seeing a lot of that in older facilities when the piping is older, correct?
Yeah, it's certainly older metal piping becomes problematic. Steam is essentially, it's being distilled. So as steam is created, it leaves behind a lot of the contaminants. And water is the reason it's such a good solvent is it is very hungry to get all that stuff back. So it's great when you're using it to get rid of stuff in instruments, but it will also attack your pipes and take the metals and other constituents out of that. So if you have older pipes, it certainly can begin to become a problem because it will begin to break down the pipes and dissolve them and bring all that stuff into your department.
Absolutely. No, for sure. Actually, Barry and I grew up, we grew up in the generation where we drank water out of a hose. So what is that, our potable water?
I actually have to say I live in rural Vermont, and my water comes from a spring completely untreated, has no chlorine in it. Drink it with the bacteria in it. Hopefully it's good bacteria. I've been drinking it for 25 years.
You're still here.
I'm still here.
Looking healthy,
and then in Canada, we have fluoride in our drinking water. So.
Yeah, in general, the United States, a lot of places do. I've lived in places that have fluoride in the water.
Yeah, and then I also grew up in the country too, where it was well water. So my clothing was a lot. My whites were way different than the kids' whites at school. So the differences in the water, correct?
Jeff, what are the specific water quality parameters a technician should be monitoring? What are we looking for?
Well, that's the $65,000 question there. It kind of depends on why you're looking. Okay. So most people, when they talk about looking at water quality, are talking about what am I doing in an ongoing monitoring program? So if you were to go to ST 108, you would go to table 4, and then you would use tables 5 and 6 to tell you where to test for the constituents that are in table 4. And table 4 has up to 7 parameters you will look at in your various types of water: utility, critical, and steam, condensate. And you will be looking for things like, what is the pH of the water? What is the conductivity of the water? What's the alkalinity? What's the total hardness? I'm sitting here reading off my list here as we're talking, bacteria and endotoxins. Now, you don't look for all of those in all types of water, but in critical water, you certainly are looking for all of those. And the reason you look for them is they're either going to impact the efficacy of your process, or they may pose a danger to your patient down the road.
Perfect. Is it chemical engineering your background, Jeff?
It is not. I am actually an aerospace engineer, and as my daughter used to say in elementary school, I'm an Aerosmith engineer, which I think sounds better.
Sounds way cooler, way cooler.
It does. I think so.
So, Jeff, as Hank and you discussed on episode 2 of Beyond Clean's expert series, multidisciplinary teams set goals to establish programs for water quality management. Can you explain a little more how customizing water quality goals can lead to reduced costs and improve patient outcomes?
Right. So as we've been discussing, water quality can vary depending on where your hospital is. Also, the age of your facility, as we discussed, can kind of affect what may be a risk to you in your process and for patient safety. So the standard wants you to kind of look at your individual situation using the tools in the standard in terms of doing some validation testing to get an understanding of where your problems are. And then your team then is going to work on a plan that best meets what you feel are the risks for your facility having to do with the water quality. So it's very much customizable from that perspective.
Perfect. Thank you. That explains everything. Jeff, are you familiar with the Flint water issue?
On the surface, yes, I am. And actually, one of my employees was involved in helping to clean that up from a laboratory standpoint, doing testing and that type of thing. And she certainly would know more about it than I do, but I am aware of what happened there. Yes.
I'm very familiar with it because I'm just right across the border from it. And we did have, I think it was last year, Jahan Azizi come be a speaker, and he's right from the area. And Barry, are you familiar at all with that crisis that happened over there?
I'm not. No.
It was, sorry, correct me if I'm wrong, water contamination. So they pulled water from a different source, didn't change the piping, ended up contaminating the whole city's water. Actually, I don't even know to this day if this was less than 10 years ago, but more than 5 years ago, I want to say. You still really shouldn't drink the water in Flint. It's just like kind of a known thing. I'm probably going to get in trouble for saying this from Flint. How would a crisis such as that affect a hospital situation, Jeff?
Right. Well, certainly on the potable side, they would have to find a different source of water if the water is contaminated. And if they had the ability to do on-site treatment of that water, they might be able to clean up the water and use it in sterile processing. But in general, it would bring things to a screeching halt until you found a way to mitigate the aspect that your water is contaminated.
Right. Because I always think to like third world countries and such who don't have the accessibility to steam sterilization, the steps.
Right.
And here in...
I think the biggest problem was lead that had leached out of the pipes there.
Yeah, the piping had leaked, and so.
Yeah, and then there were, I think, they started drawing water out of the river. The pH, I think, was really low. And generally like to keep the pH of water high because then it dissolved the pipes, and the pipes are old, and the pipes have lead in them, yeah. So this is what happens when the accountants get a hold of the water treatment plant.
And not the professionals.
Yes.
Yes, not the engineer professionals.
I know here in Nova Scotia recently in January, we had a water crisis where it affected over 200,000 people. What it was a power interruption led to a boil water advisory. And what it was, while the power was off, the pump that pumped the chlorine into the water for disinfection wasn't doing the job. So for like 3 days, they had the water boil advisory on, and we were shipping contaminated medical devices and instruments like an hour and 15 minutes away.
I remember you telling me this.
Yeah, Stace, that's the article for the newsletter too, right? So, and just an awesome response from the facility that hosted us. They really worked together and got everything done. There was some rescheduling of procedures and operations for patients, but still a lot of them were able to safely occur, right? So I can speak directly to that one. You know what I mean? It did have a big impact. Like it shut us down, like I say, for 3 days, right? But
so most hospitals, I think, have to have a disaster preparedness plan, and so this is really wandering out of my expertise because we're really focused on sterile processing and not really the whole water problem in the hospital, but at least here, and I'm sure in Canada, that you have to have a disaster response plan. And boil water notices are going to be top of the list because they're something that do happen with some frequency in most places. So they must have a response plan for that. And generally it is, we got to send the instruments out until water's safe to use, unless you have a different way of dealing with it.
Yeah, it was seamless because, they do have the plan like that, Jeff. And, it just... some similar things do happen like this, like you say, through history and in the past, and you learn from them as well, right? So I find each time something like this happens, they are few and far between, but you get a little better at them too, right? So
right, I find that they're more common in areas that have older piping, like so in New England, our piping is the oldest piping in the States, and it's not uncommon at least once a year for the town down the road to have a boil water notice because their water main broke and they have contamination. So.
Well, perfect. Well, thank you so much, Jeff, for joining us today.
That was my pleasure.
To having you again in the future.
Yeah, that'd be great.
To all of our listeners too, Jeff and Hank do a water expert series on our Beyond Clean, I guess you'd say the U.S. I don't know, I always want to say like, oh, our other Beyond Clean, but I'm like, no, it is. We're all together. We're
Right.
just the Canadian side. So again, thank you, Jeff, so much for sharing your expertise with us. And that's really cool that I learned that you were basically an astronaut.
No. I'm not an astronaut. I'm an Aerosmith engineer.
As your daughter probably told people.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
He's an Aerosmith. Yeah.
Exactly.
Aerosmith engineer. So perfect. Well, thank you so much, Jeffrey,
All
for
right.
sharing your
Thank
expertise
you.
and information. And is there a way for our listeners to reach you if they want to have any more questions?
Sure. Always reach me on the web at www.verdawater.com. We also, in the States, we have an 800 number, 800-748-2322. Give us a call.
Perfect. And we'll also share that website too in the episode description.
All right. Great.
Perfect. All right. Thanks, Jeff.
Thanks to everyone for joining us on another episode of the Beyond Clean Canada podcast. Jeffrey Paquet, Stace, another
He was
awesome.
awesome.
Yeah, he was.
Absolutely.
And
I can't wait to have him on in the future again and just talk about our standards, because like I said, the Canadian standards do pull a lot from American, comparison wise.
Yeah.
So,
and ISO, yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
We'll definitely have Jeff again. And that's really neat. I want to know more about NASA.
And what I like about Jeff, too, he's that smart, but he's also that aware that when he's explaining things and when he's talking with people, you can actually understand what he's talking about.
Yes.
That's what I enjoy about him, too.
I agree. Yeah. He's not, I'd be like, no, bring it down to the non-engineer level there, Jeff.
Yeah.
Beautiful. All right. Well, thanks for joining us again. Stay tuned. We have way more episodes coming up your way. So remember, keep fighting dirty.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Beyond Clean Canada, your source for MDR content, education, and inspiration. If you enjoyed this conversation, we'd love to hear from you on the BCCA LinkedIn or Facebook page, or anywhere podcasts are heard. Make sure to give us a 5-star rating on your favorite app. And until we talk again, keep fighting dirty.